At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. After all, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Larissa. Let's begin. It happened faster than the Briller Emperor or his family could have imagined. One moment, life in the Imperial Palace was normal, with Princess Italy arguing with her father about the situation in the outer colonies early that morning, before the merchants and politicians arrived for their meetings. The next, the windows of the throne room exploded inward, hurling the calm morning into utter chaos. Moments later, the stunned guards were helping the Emperor back to his feet as Italy moved toward the shattered window. Something vast and dark now blotted out the sky. She recognized it at once, and a single question echoed in her mind. Why was there a human warship here? Before she could process the sight, heavy footsteps pounded across the floor behind her. A guard, one of the younger ones, she thought distantly, crashed into her with the full weight of his armored body. His arms wrapped around her waist as he threw them both sideways away from the window. They hit the floor hard. The impact drove the air from Italy's lungs, and she felt something sharp slice across her left cheek. Glass. The floor was covered in it, glittering shards that had once been the magnificent stained glass windows depicting the founding of the empire. The guard's weight pressed down on her, and for a moment all she could see were fragments of colored glass mixing with the dark red blood that was beginning to pool beneath her face. Rage exploded in her chest. How dare he? She was a princess of the Briller Empire, not some helpless child to be thrown around like a sack of grain. She twisted beneath him, ready to unleash a torrent of fury that would have this guard demoted to cleaning the waste recyclers for the next decade. His blue skin had gone pale, almost gray. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with absolute terror. His long ears, which should have been standing proud or at least relaxed, were shaking so violently that she could hear them trembling against his helmet. His mouth moved, but no words came out. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking up, through the shattered window, at the shadow that had swallowed the sky. The anger drained from her body as quickly as it had come. Italy pushed herself up slowly, carefully, mindful of the glass embedded in the floor. The guard scrambled back, still trembling, and she rose to her full height. Glass fragments tumbled from her ceremonial robes, the dark purple ones with silver threading that she'd chosen specifically because they made her look older, more authoritative. She brushed at them methodically, buying herself time to think. "That," she said, her voice traveling across the suddenly silent throne room, "is a human warship." The guard who had tackled her made a small, strangled sound. "If the humans wanted us dead," Italy continued, still brushing glass from her sleeves and somehow staying calm, "hiding behind a wall would mean nothing. Being on the lowest floor would mean nothing. Even retreating to the Imperial bunkers would mean nothing." She paused, finally looking up to meet the eyes of every guard, every advisor, every trembling soul in that room. "If that ship has reached the skies of our capital, the only thing left for us is to learn what we have done to offend humanity." The silence that followed was absolute. Italy felt a sharp pain in her cheek and remembered the cut. She turned, looking for something reflective, and her eyes fell on the only mirror that had somehow survived what the windows hadn't. It hung on the far wall, slightly crooked now, but intact. She walked to it, aware of every eye following her. What she saw in that 2-second glimpse made something in her stomach twist. Her usually beautiful face, the one that had graced imperial portraits and appeared on currency across 36 worlds, now bore a jagged cut right through one of her distinctive black spots. A drop of red blood flowed from the wound. Her black hair, which she'd spent 20 minutes arranging that morning, hung in disheveled tangles around her face. Her long ears, normally held at the perfect angle that denoted royal breeding and composure, were shaking with involuntary tremors from the adrenaline flooding her system. She looked worse than she did on her worst mornings, when she stumbled to her mirror half asleep and puffy-faced from restless dreams. "Italy!" Her father's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She turned immediately from the mirror and walked toward the throne, her spine straight despite everything. The Emperor sat in his seat of power, but his usual dignity had been replaced by something harder and sharper. As she approached, She took in the scene around him. The guards, both male and female, stood at attention, but their long ears betrayed them. Her species was one of the few in the galaxy where individuals reacted differently when under stress. Some, like the guard who had tackled her, had ears that shook uncontrollably. Others had ears that went rigid, standing straight up like antennae, searching for threats. The throne room was a forest of trembling and rigid ears, a visible display of the fear that gripped them all. The Emperor's eyes fell on her face. She watched as his gaze locked onto the drop of blood on her cheek, the cut through her black spot. In that instant, his ears, which had been trembling like the rest of them, stopped their shaking completely. They returned to their normal, proud position, but his face transformed. The old, normally calm features that had presided over the Empire for 40 years became sharp and fierce.
"Those cursed humans,"
he snarled, his voice dripping with venom.
"They dare to harm the Imperial family. This is an act of war."
He turned to the nearest guards, his voice rising.
"Summon the admirals, all of them, now! This is an act of war against the Briller Empire."
Itili's mind raced. Her father was being too emotional. She understood why. Seeing his daughter bloodied had triggered his protective instincts, but emotion had no place in their current situation. She took a breath and spoke, her voice soft but clear enough to be heard.
"Father, the human warship is above our heads right now."
He turned to her, fury still burning in his eyes.
"If the humans wanted to attack us,"
she continued carefully,
"they could level this palace at any moment. They could have done so the moment their ship reached our planet, but they haven't."
"Look at what they've done to you!"
The Emperor rose from his throne, gesturing at her face.
"Look at your bleeding face!"
He turned to address everyone in the room, his voice thundering.
"They have insulted the Empire itself by harming a member of the Imperial family!"
Itili felt her own anger rising, not just at the humans, but at the situation. Still, she kept her voice level.
"Father, no one was actually hurt by whatever the shockwave was. I was only injured because a guard acted—"
She paused, searching for the right word. She wanted to say stupidly, but seeing how angry her father was, she reconsidered.
"With good intentions, but little necessity."
The Emperor's eyes swept the room, his gaze stopping for a moment on the guard who had tackled her. The poor male looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The Emperor turned back to his daughter, and to the two advisors who stood trembling beside the throne.
"What should we do then?"
he asked, and there was a dangerous edge to his voice. The first advisor, an elderly male named Vortis, spoke up immediately.
"Your Majesty, we should use the old tunnels. They were built during the founding wars, specifically for situations like this. We can evacuate the Imperial family to the mountain fortress and—"
No,
the second advisor, a female named Alara, interrupted.
"The emergency ships, they're small, maneuverable. The humans won't be able to track them all if we launch them in different directions. We can scatter the Imperial family across the Empire and—"
"Or," Itili said, her voice cutting through the increasingly frantic plans,
"we could try talking to them."
Both advisors turned to stare at her as if she'd suggested they all jump out the broken window.
"The ship is still there,"
she continued, glancing back at the window to confirm. The massive shadow hadn't moved.
"And they haven't attacked yet. That has to mean something."
Her father made that weird sound with his throat, a sort of rumbling growl that was a habit particularly his, not normal for their species. It meant he was thinking deeply, weighing options. After a moment, he looked at his two advisors.
"Who should go talk to these humans?"
he asked.
"The ambassadors are off-world. We clearly need someone right now."
The two advisors exchanged a look of pure panic.
"Your Majesty,"
Vortis stammered.
I am not trained for this kind of negotiation. I am only a domestic policy advisor, trade agreements and taxation codes. That's my expertise, not—"
"I handle cultural affairs,"
Alara added quickly.
"Museum funding and artistic preservation. I'm just a mere advisor. Surely there must be someone better qualified."
Itili felt a spike of anger inside her chest. These were the same two advisors who were always boasting at state dinners about their close working relationship with the Emperor.
about how they had his ear on all matters great and small. But now, when that relationship might require them to actually put themselves at risk, they were just simple advisors. She noticed her father's ears go stiff in a particular way, a subtle tell she'd learned to read over the years. He was thinking the same thing.
I see,
The Emperor said slowly.
so you think I should go instead?
Both advisors' eyes went wide.
Then perhaps I should,
He continued, and a dark laugh escaped him.
though I can't promise I won't declare war on their stupid human faces the moment I see them.
The advisors began to panic, talking over each other, but before they could form coherent sentences, Italy spoke.
I must go.
The Emperor's head snapped toward her.
Absolutely not.
You weren't against it when my brother went to the other side of the galaxy to negotiate peace in enemy territory,
She pointed out, keeping her voice steady.
That was different,
Her father said firmly.
Different how?
Italy challenged.
Because he was the crown prince?
She paused, then added with calculated bluntness.
Or because I lacked the dangling bits between my legs?
Awkward silence crashed over the throne room like a gravitational wave. Even the guards seemed to hold their breath. Italy held her father's gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to back down. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the Emperor sighed, a long, heavy sound that made him look every one of his ears.
You may go,
He said quietly.
but you will take the lead guard with you.
His voice hardened.
And you must promise me, Italy, that you will only attempt communication from the ground. Under no circumstances are you to enter that human ship. Do you understand?
Italy smiled, relief flooding through her.
I promise, Father.
Her eyes were already searching the room for the lead guard, already planning what she would say to the humans, already thinking 3 steps ahead. She should have known better. 1 hour later, Italy sat in a small shuttle that was being guided into the docking bay of the enormous human warship, and the lead guard beside her was trembling so hard that his armor rattled.
It's going to be fine.
She told him for the 7th time, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. The human voice came through the shuttle's communication system again, calm and professional. Briller shuttle, adjust your approach vector by 0.3 degrees. You're doing great. The human conducting their approach was named Captain Keaton Mueller, and he'd been nothing but polite since they'd first made contact. That politeness was one of the few things keeping Italy from completely regretting her decision to do the exact opposite of what she'd promised her father. She hadn't wanted to break her promise, but the humans had been difficult over the communications, demanding, not requesting. Demanding that a high-level official come inside to their ship to speak with their ambassador. It smelled like a power play, designed to make them even more uncomfortable than they already were in their own home, on their own planet, which had been so directly invaded. The only silver lining was that Captain Mueller seemed decent. When she and the lead guard had first entered their tiny shuttle, terrified and uncertain, his voice had come through the calm with unexpected warmth. "Hey, I know this is scary," he'd said, "but try to think of it this way. You're about to see the inside of a Retribution-class warship. There are human military buffs who would give their left arm for this opportunity. Though, hopefully under better circumstances. Maybe with less possibility of interstellar war." He'd paused. "Too soon for jokes? Sorry, my wife says I have terrible timing." Despite everything, Italy had laughed. It had been a small, strangled sound, but it had been a laugh. Now, as the shuttle settled onto the landing platform with just a bump, she felt that momentary amusement evaporate. The docking bay doors sealed behind them with an ominous and very long hiss. Through the viewport, she could see humans in military uniforms gathering around the shuttle. "Okay." Captain Mueller's voice came through one last time. "When you exit, just follow me. I'll get you to the ambassador. And hey, I know this seems bad, but the ambassador's actually a good guy. If everyone stays calm, this will be resolved quickly. Trust me." Italy wished she could trust him. But as the shuttle door opened and she stepped out, the lead guard at her side, she felt the weight of dozens of human eyes on her. They looked at her with distrust, with hostility, as if she were the enemy to be fought against. It felt strange. She didn't have any bad blood with humans. Her species didn't either. As far as she knew, and she was rather well informed about the secrets of the Empire, more informed than most, thanks to her habit of reading classified reports that her father's advisors carelessly left lying around. So why were they looking at her like that? Captain Mueller met them at the bottom of the shuttle ramp. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps early 40s in human years, with sandy hair and a kind face that seemed at odds with his military uniform. He gave her a small, apologetic smile. "Princess Tilly, I presume. Welcome aboard the Retribution. If you follow me, the ambassador is waiting." The walk through the ship passed in a tense blur. Captain Mueller kept trying to make conversation, pointing out features of the ship, explaining human naval traditions. Tilly appreciated his efforts, but every human they passed stared at her with that same hostile suspicion. Some whispered to each other as she walked by. None of them smiled. Her ears were trembling again, she realized. She forced them to stillness through sheer willpower. They stopped in front of a meeting room guarded by 2 humans in full tactical gear, armor, weapons, the works. Captain Mueller turned to them apologetically. "I'm sorry, but the guard has to stay outside. The ambassador will only meet with the princess alone." The lead guard stepped forward immediately, his hand moving to his weapon.
Absolutely not. I swore to protect her with my life, and I will not.
"It's fine," Tilly said, cutting him off. She could see how afraid he was, could see the way his hands shook despite his brave words. She felt her own adrenaline spiking, felt her ears beginning to tremble again despite her efforts to control them. But Captain Mueller had been kind, and he'd said the ambassador was a good guy. And the humans had a reputation for being fair, for honoring their word, for valuing justice and due process. Of course, she also remembered a few stories about human pirates that were quite scary, and the human military's capacity for violence was legendary across the galaxy. "I choose to believe the humans will be fair," she said, meeting her guard's eyes. "I know their reputation as a species."
"Princess, please."
"Stay here," she ordered. "That's a command." The door opened. Tilly walked through it before she could change her mind. Behind her, she heard the lead guard's protest cut off as the human guards blocked his entry. The meeting room inside was surprisingly nice. Comfortable chairs, a table made of real wood, soft lighting that was actually quite pleasant. It looked more like a corporate boardroom than a military briefing space. The human ambassador sat in what looked like to be a leather-cushioned chair, consuming a hot beverage from a ceramic mug. He was male, around 30 human years old if her memory from cross-species affairs training could be trusted. His name came to her after a moment. Trent. Ambassador Trent something. She'd seen his file when her father had received the list of new human diplomatic appointments. The ambassador turned to look at her as the door sealed behind her. The first words out of his mouth made her blood boil. "Really? I can't believe the old emperor sent his daughter instead of coming in person." Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended. "You should count yourself lucky that it's me, Ambassador. If my father were here, he would have declared war after hearing those words." The human laughed, as if he'd just heard a very funny joke. "Yeah, I believe that, since the declaration of war arrived on Earth yesterday, pretty strongly worded. Said that any human ambassador leaving Earth would be considered a target by the Empire. Your family's empire." Tilly felt the floor drop out from under her. "What? There has to be a mistake." The ambassador leaned back in his chair, studying her with sharp eyes. "So that's your strategy? Play crazy and uninformed. Princess, that might work on the Galactic Council, who need a full investigation in 3 committees before they can find accountability for anything. But it won't work on humanity." "I'm not playing at anything," Tilly said, struggling to keep her voice level. "And I don't understand how you can be so sure my people declared war against Earth." "How can I be sure?" the ambassador challenged. The ambassador rose from his seat, setting his mug down with a sharp click. Let me explain what's obvious to everyone except apparently you. Yesterday, an official ship arrived on Earth unannounced. It landed without properly respecting the instructions from air traffic control, basically told them they would land anywhere they wanted. Then a delegation of 7 members of your species, all wearing the Imperial insignia on their chests, mind you, walked right up to our oldest, most respected ambassador, and they basically shoved a declaration of war in his face. He paused to take a sip from his mug, and Italy found herself frozen, unable to process what she was hearing. It was a rude letter, the ambassador continued, with that blue official seal of your father's that your species loves to boast is impossible to replicate. Very fancy, super official. Exactly what we see as an act of war. Italy's mind raced. This couldn't be true. It couldn't. Her father would never. But then, she'd been with her father all week. He couldn't have ordered this without her knowing, unless...
May I see this declaration?
She asked, her voice low and weak. The ambassador looked at her skeptically, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the table between them. Knock yourself out. We ran every lab test on it before coming here to demand an explanation. It's real, princess. Your father has, at the very least, gone crazy. Italy approached the table slowly, as if the paper might explode. She picked it up with trembling fingers. The paper itself was immediately recognizable, that particular shade of blue-gray that the Briller Empire used exclusively for official communications. It was manufactured on their home world, using a process that was a closely guarded state secret. She unfolded the paper and began to read. The words were harsh, uncompromising, exactly the kind of language her father would use if he'd actually decided to declare war. It demanded that humanity cease all expansion into the Outer Rim. It accused humans of numerous treaty violations. It declared that any human diplomatic vessel leaving Earth would be destroyed on sight. At the bottom, pressed into the paper itself, was the Imperial seal, her father's seal. Italy stared at it. The seal looked visually perfect, the intertwined symbols representing the 5 founding houses of the Empire, the radiating lines signifying their divine mandate to rule, all rendered in that distinctive blue compound that her family had used for 700 years. She closed her eyes and ran her fingertips over the seal. Her species had evolved on a world with limited visibility, thick forests and perpetual fog, and had developed extraordinarily sensitive touch. She could feel the textures that most species couldn't even perceive. The texture was right. Every ridge, every depression, every subtle variation in the pressed compound matched what it should be. She was almost ready to accept the human version of events. Her father must have gone mad. There was no other explanation except... On impulse, she brought the seal close to her face and inhaled. Her eyes went wide. She froze in place, the paper trembling in her hands. Princess? The ambassador's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you still breathing? Italy's mind raced, pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. She scrambled for words, her thoughts moving faster than her mouth could form them.
The seal,
she managed to say.
It's almost perfect.
Almost? The ambassador leaned forward.
The scent mark,
Italy whispered.
It's almost perfect, but it's wrong. Wrong in a way only one person could have made it.
Who? She looked up at the ambassador, and she knew her face must have shown her shock.
My brother.
The ambassador's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion. Wait, your brother sent this? Not your father. Italy smelled the seal again, bringing it right to her nose, breathing in the complex scent markers that were invisible to most species but obvious to hers. There was no doubt, none whatsoever.
I'm certain,
she said.
I remember we used to forge our tutor's signature when we were children to get out of lessons. My brother always skipped the chemistry classes. His knowledge still has some gaps to this day. He can replicate the visual appearance and texture perfectly, but he never gets the scent markers quite right. He mixes the proportions incorrectly.
The ambassador was silent for a long moment, a vague look in his eyes as if he were communicating with someone else through an implant, then spoke. I mean, using humanity to assassinate your father. That's creative."
He paused.
"And spectacularly stupid. What if we had just attacked the planet instead?"
Italy felt like she was going to be sick. The ambassador was right. If this was true, and it was, she knew it was, then this was the single stupidest thing her brother had ever done, by far, by an enormous margin. Her brother, the crown prince, had tried to trick humanity into killing their father so he could take the throne. She bowed deeply to the human ambassador, deeper than she had ever bowed to anyone except her father.
"Please,"
she said, and she didn't care that her voice was shaking. "Please don't kill my brother before he has a trial. Our species has life sentences, harsh punishments, but he deserves a trial, at least that."
The ambassador scratched his head, looking uncomfortable for the first time since she'd entered the room. After a long pause, he spoke. "I mean, we came here to show force and to dissuade you folks from starting a war, not to pursue justice. If there's no war, I suppose you can deal with it your own way."
"Thank you,"
Italy whispered. "Thank you." But she remained frozen in place, her mind now grappling with a new problem. How was she going to tell her father that his son, his heir, had tried to kill him by manipulating humanity into doing the dirty work? The minutes passed. She stood there, motionless, the declaration still clutched in her hands. She didn't know how long she'd been silent when the ambassador spoke again, and this time his voice was completely different. Gentle, warm, concerned.
"Princess, would it help you if we captured your brother and delivered him to you?"
Italy's head snapped up.
"Think about it,"
the ambassador continued.
"You don't have a way to know if he has a backup plan. What if he's arranged another accident to happen to your father once we leave? What if there are more assassins, more plots we don't know about?"
Italy made a fist, her nails digging into her palm. She was making a decision that wasn't technically hers to make, but her father would be too emotional, too heartbroken to think clearly. Someone had to protect him. "I would be forever grateful if you did that," she said. The ambassador extended his hand toward the door.
"Then come with me to the bridge."
What followed was a repetition of the sonic boom that had shattered the Imperial Palace windows that morning. But this time, it happened at a different palace, her brother's private estate on the northern continent. And this time, the humans didn't wait in their ship. Italy watched from the bridge of the Retribution as dozens of armored figures dropped from the ship using some kind of jetpack technology. They moved with frightening speed, a coordinated dance of military power that took less than 3 minutes from deployment to extraction. Her brother didn't even have time to activate his personal shields before human soldiers crashed through the windows of his private chambers and seized him. In the weeks that followed, Italy faced trials she'd never imagined. The legal proceedings were exhausting, filled with lawyers and witnesses and evidence presented in excruciating detail. The political instability was worse. Factions within the empire trying to use the chaos to advance their own agendas, claiming the imperial family was weak, that new leadership was needed. And worst of all was her father, the emperor with the broken heart, who had aged a decade in a week, who looked at the empty seat where his son used to sit at state dinners and said nothing, but whose ears drooped in a way Italy had never seen before. But there was one piece of good news, one bright spot in the darkness. Earth had allowed a certain warship with a certain ambassador to remain in orbit around the Briller homeworld, to prevent chaos and ensure a smooth transition of power. The Retribution hung in their sky like a guardian, rather than a threat now. And Italy was glad for it, glad in a way that surprised her. Because when the political pressure became too much, when the hostile factions within the empire grew too bold, when assassination attempts were made against her father by those who thought the imperial family was vulnerable, the humans were there. Captain Keaton Mueller, who had guided her shuttle with such kindness, became a regular presence in the palace, coordinating security with the Imperial Guard, and Ambassador Trent, who had been so hostile and suspicious at first, became something like a friend. He taught her about human coffee, that hot beverage he'd been drinking, and explained human politics in a way that helped her navigate the complex situation she found herself in.
Her brother stood trial. He was found guilty of attempted regicide, treason, and conspiracy to start an interstellar war. The sentence was imprisonment for 3 lifetimes, a symbolic punishment since he only had 1 life to serve, but one that satisfied both Briller law and human observers. Her father never visited him in prison. Italy did once, because she felt she should. Her brother looked smaller somehow, diminished. He didn't apologize. She didn't expect him to. 6 months after that terrible morning, when the windows exploded and changed her life, Italy stood in the same throne room, now repaired, the stained glass windows replaced with even more beautiful versions commissioned from the finest artists in the empire. She looked up at the sky through the clear sections of glass and saw the Retribution still there, a dark shape against the stars.
They're scheduled to leave next week,
her father said quietly, coming to stand beside her. His ears were upright again, his face no longer quite so haggard. Time was healing him, slowly.
I know,
Italy said.
The ambassador requested a private meeting with you tomorrow, to say goodbye, I imagine.
Italy nodded, not trusting herself to speak.
You like them?
Her father observed. It wasn't a question.
The humans.
Yes, Italy admitted.
Is that wrong?
Her father was silent for a long moment. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder.
Your brother tried to start a war by exploiting humanity's power. He thought he could manipulate them, use them as a weapon.
He paused.
But instead they showed us what true honor looks like, what fairness looks like, what it means to seek truth rather than advantage.
He squeezed her shoulder gently.
No, my daughter, it's not wrong. It might be the most right thing any of us has felt in a very long time.
The next day, Italy met with Ambassador Trent one final time in the palace gardens, far from the political machinery of the throne room. He brought her a parting gift, a plant from Earth called coffee, along with detailed instructions on how to cultivate it and brew the beverage she'd grown fond of.
Maybe next time I see you,
he said with a smile,
it will be under better circumstances. Maybe at a trade summit or a cultural exchange. Something boring and diplomatic where nobody threatens to blow up anyone's planet.
I'd like that, Italy said, and she meant it. As the Retribution finally departed, lifting from the sky like a dark bird returning home, Italy stood in the palace gardens with her father beside her. The imperial family was smaller now, diminished by betrayal. But they were still standing, still here. And they had learned something valuable, something that would shape the Empire's future in ways they couldn't yet fully understand. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the warship in your sky is not an enemy, but an answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. And sometimes, in the darkest moment, when your own blood has betrayed you and your world is falling apart, a stranger's honor can be the thing that saves you.